I don't know. But I'll tell you something, Doc. You better not mess around.
Seeing it was so easy to come by, taking only my life's blood and the sweat of my brow.
Wearing the badge was his identity, carried out the role, amused countless people. But there was a reality that Ken Curtis never dared to speak, until now, behind that charming rural accent. His secret confession came to light years after Gunsmoke's TV appearances ended, shattering viewers' preconceived notions. Were you guilty? Cry foul? On the other hand, it may be a long-kept secret that has just begun to stir. He wore this mask, not only a part, and when it did fall, the truth beneath was worse than everyone had anticipated. In order to fully grasp the significance of what followed, it is necessary to retrace our steps back to the Ken Curtis who captivated the world. Only then can we move on to the confession. Ken Curtis is a name that will be familiar to everyone who grew up watching old westerns. Festus Hagen, the disheveled, sassy deputy from Gunsmoke, is the one thing that most people remember him for. Yes, let's be honest, that part was enough to cement his place in history. However, that was actually only the surface of a man who was far more shocking than that. There was more to Gunsmoke than meets the eye. A cultural behemoth it was. It aired for a whole 2 decades. Characters were more like family than fictitious cowboys on Dodge City, and the dusty streets became a second home for millions of fans. Oh, and Festus? He was the law. Miss Kitty was the charmer. Festus, though, was the star of the show in his own peculiar manner. People loved him because he was genuine, even though he wasn't flawless. Even without any intense action, some of Curtis's most memorable sequences from the show were iconic. Such subtle, eccentric moments brought Festus's true colors to light, like in the episode where he serenades a dying man with a traditional frontier song, or when he takes it upon himself to care for a youngster left without parents in Dodge City. His eccentricities were genuine, and his humor had heart. Everyone could see it, and it stayed with them forever. Everyone knew this legendary figure as the trustworthy sidekick, the kind cowboy, and the troubled singer. Even though Ken Curtis wasn't the initial option, the surprising and twisty road that led to him as Festus altered the destiny of Gunsmoke. Every casting choice for Gunsmoke should be announced with a great splash and a spectacular presentation, because the program is legendary. On the other hand, Ken Curtis didn't exactly make a grand entrance into Dodge City. One of the most subtly intriguing twists in television history is the manner in which he was cast as Festus Hagen. The early 1960s saw Gunsmoke's meteoric rise to fame. After over 10 years on air, it had solidified its position as a television staple in the United States. James Arness's portrayal of Marshal Matt Dillon has been ubiquitous in American living rooms. The cast and the show were both changing, though. A huge hole was created when Dennis Weaver, who played the charming Chester Good, chose to depart from the show to work on other projects. Fans had come to love Chester because of the rhythm he provided to the program. He was more than simply a sidekick. It wouldn't be easy to replace him. Not in the way you may expect, but here is where Ken Curtis comes into play. The television and movie industries were already familiar with Curtis. We have established that he was a dependable actor who could pull off the cowboy part with a touch of comedy and grit when acting in John Ford's westerns. However, his relationship with Gunsmoke was rather more intimate. In addition to his previous work with many individuals involved with the production, he had a close friendship with James Arness. Nothing was assured, though, not even with those ties. He didn't go through the motions of trying out for Festus. Actually, Ken's debut on the program was before Festus even existed. The episode Us Hagens from 1962 was his first appearance on Gunsmoke, albeit in a guest role as a totally different character named Kyle Kelly. The episode was intended to be a one-off, more like another eccentric individual passing through Dodge. Something, though, about Ken's performance was exceptional. He wasn't making an effort. This was no animated Western outlaw he was portraying. His distinctive scratchy voice, which sounded like it belonged on the Kansas frontier, was accompanied with depth and time. The spectators took note. Even the producers did it. Curtis was exceptional at that fine line between rough and friendly. He was good at action situations, had crisp lines, and had that quirky charisma that made you want to root for him. Because of the overwhelming positive response, the show's creators opted to reinstate him, but this time they gave him a memorable name: Festus Hagen. The lawman Festus lacked polish. He lacked cleanliness of speech and wasn't the swiftest sketch. Yet, it was the whole idea. Festus was an innovator in a world when other Westerns stuck to formulas. He possessed a unique blend of unkempt intelligence and a rustic reasoning that somehow managed to arrive at the correct solution every time. Curtis embraced it all. The slouched gait, raspy voice, and expressions that made others laugh unconsciously were all his creations for Festus. Curtis didn't just step into Chester's shoes upon his formal 1964 cast edition, he reimagined the sidekick character in its entirety. Festus eventually won over fans' hearts as much as Matt Dillon did. He made the program more balanced. Festus had a gift for lightening the mood when things became serious. You could see he could handle himself when things heated up. A real-life guy named Cedar Jack, whom Ken Curtis knew as a kid in Las Animas, Colorado, was another source of inspiration for him. The unique accent and delivery that Festus is known for were subsequently crafted by Curtis. The performance by Curtis paid homage to the local character Cedar Jack, who was noted for his gruff personality. It's ironic that one of the longest-running parts in the show's history became a character who wasn't even planned to be permanent. But that's what makes television so special. The most memorable scenes in a show don't always originate in the script. Sometimes they are organic extensions of a stellar performance. Did you hear about Ken Curtis? Not only that, he played Festus. Festus was his name. Something as small as a guest appearance blossomed into something far larger than anybody had anticipated. But Ken Curtis's story had unexpected twists and turns before he even arrived in Dodge City. And it began in an unlikely location. Take a step back. A small-town youngster with an unstoppable drive and a voice that could stop you in your tracks. Ken Curtis was there before he became a household name or stepped into the dusty boots of Festus on Gunsmoke. Ken wasn't born into the spotlight or cowboy renown. He was born Curtis Wayne Gates in the little town of Lamar, Colorado, on July 2, 1916. His origins were humble, Seway. His dad, Dan Gates, was Bent County's sheriff. Back when Curtis was a young guy with big goals and a small-town law and order background, he was free to roam the open road. Nobody lived it up on the plains. Dust and chores abound on days like this, when a child's imagination might run wild due to the lack of stimulation. While he helped out around the house, he would often sing along to the radio or listen to cowboy stories. His silky, full-bodied, and emotionally expressive voice was immediately noticeable. He was more than just a singer. His music was a storyteller. Curtis left Colorado College after a brief stay to pursue his passion and talent in Los Angeles. Everything altered because of that decision. Big band music was all the rage in the 1940s, and Curtis possessed a voice that was perfectly at home in that genre. He had a voice that could harmonize with anyone's, deep, silky, and endearing. He executed it as well. His big break came when he sang with the renowned Tommy Dorsey Band. To spice things up a bit, he temporarily took over for Frank Sinatra as the band's main singer. Try to picture that. A youthful cowboy was now fronting the band that catapulted Old Blue Eyes to fame. Time spent working with Dorsey helped Curtis hone his craft. get national recognition, and demonstrate that he was more than just a nice voice. He could perform. This was true even though Curtis never achieved Sinatra's degree of success in the music industry. It would work for him. Also, he possessed magnetic charm. Sooner or later, Hollywood would take notice. However, Curtis was not satisfied with only performing beneath the spotlights. The Western way of life had a certain allure that kept drawing him back. Everything from the horses, to the headgear, to the boundless fields. Plus, he met paths with John Ford, one of the most influential people in cinematic history in the late 1940s. No ordinary director could compare to John Ford. When it came to Westerns, he was the director. The man who shot Liberty Valance, The Searchers, and Stagecoach are the ones we're thinking of. He was the one who essentially pioneered the style. Beyond his command of the microphone, Ford perceived something more in Curtis. A natural storyteller with raw skill and rustic charisma caught his eye. Beginning with 1950s Rio Grande, Ken made appearances in Ford's films. At least not just yet, but he was just as impressive when paired with John Wayne and other A-listers. He was versatile, adding a unique style to his roles as warriors, scouts, and sidekicks. This wasn't a supporting role, it was a stepping stone, and others began to take note. More importantly, Ford became more than just a mentor. He became like family. Sure, the link opened doors, but name-dropping was never Curtis's strong suit. From composing a love song to pursuing criminals on horseback, he never missed a beat, was always punctual, and gave it his best. He possessed that uncommon combination of skill and dedication that subtly garners admiration in a competitive industry. One thing that many people fail to notice is that Ken Curtis had already established himself as a formidable filmographer before to Gunsmoke's involvement. He didn't achieve success suddenly. He worked his way up through singing engagements, little parts in films, and many days when stardom seemed out of reach. He persisted, nevertheless. In retrospect, his life story, the son of a sheriff who became a singer, a cowboy actor, and the beloved TV deputy of the United States, almost seems too idyllic. However, there is the issue with Ken Curtis. Being famous wasn't his original goal. The job took him someplace extraordinary, and all he did was follow it. Hollywood was not the starting point of his story. It all started in a little village with a courageous young singer-songwriter. Ken Curtis was always authentic, whether he was performing with a huge band or galloping across Monument Valley in one of John Ford's films. Every character and performance he did was believable because of him. He maintained his modest demeanor even as fame began to dwindle around him. For that reason, he wasn't only an actor when he arrived in Dodge City. He was Festus. The journey there was as interesting as his eventual character. When everything appeared to be settling into a comfortable rhythm, Ken unexpectedly found himself in a completely different arena. This arena was dominated by passionate opinions and public debate, rather than scripts or cameras. Some viewers saw Curtis as the level-headed Festus Hagen on Gunsmoke, the stern but kind-hearted narrator of Dodge City. Despite his characteristic Southern drawl and weathered cowboy hat, Curtis was more than simply a Wild West figure. When he was away from the television, he became more entangled in politics, which was a little more unexpected. It was never Curtis's style for a celebrity to utilize a press tour as an opportunity to make sweeping political remarks. Still, he wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed in when the moment was right, and provide his support to others whose goals he believed were congruent with his own. During the tumultuous 1960s, a period in American history, one of the first indications of this occurred. In the midst of a civil rights movement that was causing widespread unrest and a blazing Vietnam War, political divisions were being forged in American living rooms as well as in Washington, D.C. In the midst of all this, Curtis subtly endorsed Barry Goldwater for president in 1964. Hollywood didn't exactly love Goldwater because of his conservative views. Actually, in an industry where people generally had a different attitude, supporting him was rather a daring action. However, Curtis did not consider it daring. To him, it seemed sincere. Curtis identified with Goldwater's conservative ideals and emphasis on individual responsibility because he embodied an old-school, hands-off attitude to government. There was no PR stunt involved. His intention was not to provoke anyone. The individual he thought was most qualified for the position was the only one he backed. When Curtis and his Gunsmoke co-star Milburn Stone visited the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library in 1965, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Even while Curtis's visit didn't have any overt political messages, it did demonstrate his quiet reverence for the figures who had molded American history. He may not have been an outspoken political figure, but he was obviously keeping tabs on the nation's progress. And then 1976 rolled around. Watergate had not yet healed the country. People were searching for a politician who seemed genuine and steady, since their trust in politicians had never been lower. In that year, when Reagan was running for the Republican nomination, Curtis was an ardent campaigner for him. It was clear. From his days in Hollywood, Curtis knew all too well the combination of theatrics and common sense that Reagan exhibited. Both men could strike up conversations with regular people in the United States, not via grandstanding, but via personal anecdotes and physical presence. This is where things become intriguing. Curtis wasn't only secretly endorsing people, he went on appearances, spoke up for Reagan, and campaigned for the president. He continued to avoid confrontation and did not like to give lectures. Reagan represented strength, optimism, and faith in America's potential, and he believed in all of those things. Plus, he was aware that his opinion may have an impact. Politics was never more important to Curtis than being himself. It was crucial. He kept his cowboy boots and didn't exchange them for campaign buttons. There was a lot more to life than politics, and it went well beyond Dodge City and television. Even when he disagreed with someone, he always made sure to respect their opinion and never used his position to sow discord. Regardless of their political leanings, that's likely why he had so many devoted followers. Ultimately, Curtis's participation in politics was not driven by a desire for power or attention. It all came down to principles. It came down to rallying behind the type of leadership he believed could safeguard the principles he had been raised with. He followed his instincts, similar to Festus, even when doing so went against the grain. But it is only the tip of the iceberg. The reality that Ken Curtis held was quite different, and he kept it to himself for quite some time. But first, let's examine his private life. Kenneth Curtis is most remembered by Gunsmoke fans for his portrayal of Festus Hagen, who rode over the prairie while delivering wisecracks with a twang and an obstinate squint in his eye. But there was a man whose real life had as many turns as any Western narrative he had ever been a part of. Hidden beneath that rugged good looks and onstage toughness, the movie great Ken Curtis's path through marriage unveils a softer, more sensitive side, as compared to his flamboyant but fleeting love tales and the relationships molded by Hollywood's golden age. His marital status is threefold. Turn the clock back to 1943. A young Ken Curtis, who was more of a singer than a cowboy, was just starting to find his stride in his profession and personal life during the time when World War II was raging and big band music was the pulse of America. He met Lorraine Page, who would later become his first wife, at Universal Studios that same year, while they were both working on contracts. Perhaps intentionally, Lorraine is not well documented. In the end, the rigors of time and travel put a strain on their once passionate love, which was typical of wartime romances. His early forays into Hollywood, such as his 1948 stint as a featured vocalist and presenter of the country music radio show WWVA Jamboree, occurred around the same time as this marriage. Their marriage was about to end in 1950 when the stresses of their rising careers and the entertainment business finally got the best of them. There was no tabloid drama around the end of their 7-year marriage. No controversy. Judgment without drama. It slowly fell apart, though, as do many partnerships in which one spouse is perpetually following their passion. The world around Curtis was also evolving rapidly. Ken Curtis remarried in 1952, only 2 years after his first marriage. This time, though, the protagonists were none other than Hollywood's elite. Barbara Ford was his second wife. She was the daughter of the renowned filmmaker John Ford. John Ford wasn't only a filmmaker, he was the filmmaker, as every Western fan worth his salt can tell you. This is the guy whose contributions to filmmaking helped define the American cowboy. And just like that, Ken Curtis went from being a promising young actor to a member of the family. There was no denying the benefits of marrying into the Ford family. Collaborating with the giant John Ford unlocked opportunities that Curtis may have needed years to find on his own. Yet, this wasn't only a professional decision. There was true affection between Barbara and Curtis. During their marriage, they probably had a front-row ticket to Hollywood power, shared adventures, and attended opulent film premieres. The couple's 12-year marriage, which began promisingly but ultimately sank into oblivion, ended in 1964 in a divorce. No big deal, yet again. Close friends and family of Curtis and Barbara suspected that the marriage had drifted apart. Not everyone fit in with the Ford family, and Curtis, for all his success, wasn't trying to be anybody's shadow. His third marriage was completely different from his first two, which appeared like chapters in completely separate books. Ken Curtis wed Tori Connolly in 1966. Tori wasn't an actress or singer like his other spouses. Not only was she not a starlet, but she was also not the daughter of a filmmaker. She avoided the spotlight and maintained a calm demeanor. Perhaps that was precisely what Curtis needed while he was going through that tough time. As a result of Gunsmoke, he had become well known by this point. The country was watching Festus, the stern but devoted and endearing deputy sheriff, and viewers were smitten. Off camera, though, Curtis yearned for something calmer, more genuine. That belonged to Tori. Their union was less public and more subdued, rarely showing up to major Hollywood events or giving the press juicy tidbits. They avoided the limelight for the most part. It was a successful collaboration, according to everyone involved. Although she remained detached from the glitter of Hollywood, Tori was a fan of Curtis's work. For the first time in his life, she provided him with a solid foundation. Without ever divorcing, the couple stayed together for the remainder of Curtis's life. Not only are Ken Curtis's marriages noteworthy, but so is the manner in which he handled each of them. He wasn't after the spotlight. His unclean laundry was not airborne. He fell, he learned. He loved. It seems like he had finally found a cadence that reflected the reserved, contemplative guy he frequently was, behind the scenes by the time he settled down with Tori. Having a husband like Curtis certainly had its share of difficulties, what with his demanding filming schedules, adoring fans, and the immense pressure to succeed on a program like Gunsmoke. Tori, though, was graceful about it. The way Curtis's private life reflected his public life is also lyrical. Festus was a complex character in Gunsmoke. He was unrefined, yet incredibly loyal, and he was a bit of an outsider, but reliable once called upon. The same dichotomy, the equilibrium between one's public persona and one's inner fragility, applied to Ken as well. Lorraine represented his optimistic beginnings, Barbara his Hollywood chapter, and Tori his peaceful resolve. His marriages to these women mirrored the stages of his life. Someone like Curtis, who was on screen for decades, makes you wonder, what was he hiding all that time? Just when you think you know them, something unexpected happens. What secret fact had he been harboring all these time, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to spill the beans? It seems to reason that the major players from a classic TV series like Gunsmoke would jump at the chance to return for a reunion film. Remember, Gunsmoke was the Western, not just any Western. It was a watershed moment in television history and catapulted its actors into stardom. Fans were shocked to hear that Festus will not be participating in Return to Dodge. Where had Curtis gone? Why didn't he just go back on the same cast that got him started? It turns out that retirement or schedule issues weren't the only factors. That was only the tip of the iceberg. People conjectured for a long time about his reasons for leaving Festus. Perhaps he felt he was too old. Perhaps it wasn't personal. Or perhaps he simply didn't want to perform the role again. However, an ugly reality was boiling behind the scenes. Despite his devoted fan following and charming country accent, Curtis was quite unhappy with the direction the reunion film was taking. Many were surprised when, after all these years, he finally spoke up. First of all, pay was a major sticking point. Festus, in Curtis's view, was a pivotal figure who ought to have a wage commensurate with his status. John Mantley, the producer, recalled that Curtis had asked for twice Amanda Blake's salary. Curtis backed out of the project after Mantley declined. It was insulting to be given a salary that didn't match his worth. It was said that Curtis told Mantley not to call again as the conversation came to a close. It was finished. There is no wiggle space. As a response to the contempt he felt, Curtis drew a hard line. It wasn't only the pay, though. The second blow came from the script. It was clear that Curtis loved what he did for a living. Festus was more than simply a comic relief. He possessed layers of tenacity, devotion, and a keen sense of justice, in addition to his eccentricities and comedic timing. The revisions made to the original draft left Curtis unhappy, he claims. He approved of Jim Burns's first draft but was opposed to any changes made after that. The updated screenplay, in Curtis's opinion, failed to honor the show's past and its characters. A major factor in his choice not to be in the reunion movie was his vehement rejection of these alterations. In his opinion, the reunion strayed too far from the original intent of Gunsmoke. Instead of accepting the payment and riding off into the sunset, he decided to remain firm. Given the reappearance of other major characters, Curtis's absence from reappearance to Dodge stood out. The character of Doc Adams was not replaced after Milburn Stone's 1980 death. The authors elevated Buck Taylor's character, Newly O'Brien, to the position of Marshal in Dodge City to fill the hole left by Festus. In light of this, you might be surprised to learn what happened to Curtis when Gunsmoke ended and the cameras ceased recording. A lot of people were curious about Festus Hagen's future after Gunsmoke ended. After Gunsmoke, Curtis showed everyone that he had a lot more tricks under his sleeve than they thought. Curtis, first and foremost, has always maintained a passion for performing. Curtis, in contrast to many actors who retire from the limelight following a part of this magnitude, remained active, but on his own terms. Years before he became famous as Festus, he sang with major bands, so he went back to his musical origins. As a reminder that he was a talented vocalist who could captivate an audience before becoming a TV cowboy. He sang at county fairs, rodeos, and Western festivals. There was still the beck and cry of television. He voiced the villainous Sheriff of Nottingham in Disney's animated classic Robin Hood, and had a few cameo appearances on episodes like The Yellow Rose. The part was a lighter fare than Festus, but it retained all of Ken Curtis's signature charisma. Curtis dabbled in production in his spare time. Working on smaller film projects allowed him to delve into narrative without being in the spotlight, and he wasn't scared to take a back seat to the camera. In doing so, he was able to maintain ties to the field he loved while establishing his own authority. Unfortunately, Curtis's adventure had to come to a close, as do all wonderful ones. After a protracted struggle with heart disease, Curtis slipped away peacefully in his sleep at his home in Fresno, California, on April 28, 1991. He has 74 years on the clock. Fans who had grown up with Festus's wild exploits were understandably saddened by his death, but his loved ones took comfort in knowing that he passed away peacefully, enveloped in the love that had sustained him throughout his extraordinary life. Cremated remains of Curtis were spread across the Colorado plains close to his hometown after his death. His impact will live on long after Curtis himself has passed away. His performances, whether he's behind the mic or playing the charming Festus, continue to touch people's hearts. As a permanent memorial to the man who brought Festus to life, a statue of Curtis stands in Clovis, California. In Dodge City, that unforgettable voice once resounded, and now, with every rerun, song, and memory of Curtis, his story rides on. Was Ken Curtis correct to leave Gunsmoke at that point? Or did he let his pride get in the way of leaving a lasting legacy? Leave a comment with your ideas. Please subscribe, like, and share. Press the video that appears next to view more similar content.